Trial lawyers and executives in suits, a doctor in scrubs, an accident victim in a wheelchair.
Late into the night, people jammed into a legislative hearing room to testify or just listen as lawmakers considered Governor Brian Kemp's top legislative priority, overhauling civil litigation rules.
Good afternoon, rather good evening. Chairman Strickland and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I thank you for having me here today.
Despite opposition from Democrats and reservations from a few key Republicans, the two bills cleared a big hurdle.
We have a motion to pass by committee substitute. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. 8. All opposed? 3. Motion carries.
Also this week, Senate Republicans took up other contentious debates, including a tax holiday on firearm sales.
The Republican Party's priorities are jacked up, to be honest.
And whether state insurance plans can cover gender-affirming care.
What we're saying is that state taxpayer dollars are not going to cover them. If you want to cover them with your own private plans, if you want to cover them with your own cash, we're not outlawing that at all.
Plus, we look at efforts by President Donald Trump and his Georgia allies in Congress to slash federal funding for agencies and programs, including at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
And what we've seen over the last few weeks is unprecedented and unacceptable.
I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali.
I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas, and this is Plugged In.
So, Sam, this week lawmakers really began digging into the details of Governor Kemp's signature policy push this session, overhauling Georgia's civil litigation rules. You've also heard it called tort reform or lawsuit reform.
Yeah, Rahul, this was the first committee hearing and the first chance for lawmakers to really hear in a public setting from non-politicians on different sides of this debate. The committee room was literally full. There was an overflow room down the hall. The hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee went for more than 5 hours, so late that committee staff had dinner catered. Rahul, I stepped away to go to manuals with a friend and came back to a text from you that the committee had kept plugging away until after 9 p.m.
That's right, Sam. You know, this is a committee that is infamous for long and late into the night meetings, but to do it this early in the legislative session was really notable, and to take on an issue of this size in just one meeting kind of tells you how much has been going on behind the scenes, especially in the governor's office, legislative office, over dinners and meetings with lobbyists and stakeholders leading up to this, as you mentioned, 5+ hour hearing. Sam, give our audience some of the flavor of this meeting.
So much to talk about here, but for now I want to zoom in on a key question that's really at the heart of this debate. Will Kemp's push to rein in big payouts from civil litigation actually result in lower insurance premiums? Let me bring in some voices to help make this debate a little more tangible. Lanny Allgood owns Singo, a Georgia pest control company with a fleet of something like 100 vehicles. Allgood testified during this marathon committee hearing, and here is what he told the committee.
In the last 5 years, company revenues have grown 21%, auto liability has doubled, and umbrella coverage has quadrupled.
So Kemp argues that so-called tort reform will lower insurance premiums for business owners like Allgood and also medical providers and really anyone who buys auto or health insurance. Van Laskoski is CEO of the small hospital in rural Stevens County. The hospital recently had to close its labor and delivery clinic, and Laskoski attributes that in part to costly malpractice insurance, making it harder to recruit OBGYNs.
If you're new in your career, it's a lot of risk and a lot of liability to absorb.
Laurel Hart, an executive with affordable housing developer Columbia Residential, also told the committee that she hopes Kemp's push will bring relief.
Our mission is increasingly threatened, not just by the cost of liability insurance. We are finding it increasingly difficult to get insurance.
Jimbo Floyd is a Northeast Georgia commercial insurance agent.
Nobody can remember carriers leaving the state of Georgia as rapidly as they are today. We must reverse the trend and become a state carriers want to do business, which will increase competition and stabilize rates.
Okay, Sam, so that's a bunch of people supporting this push. But we've mentioned that the legislation is divisive. Tell us about the other side.
So Democrats and plaintiffs' lawyers say these changes will restrict Georgians from pursuing justice in the civil legal system. And a lot of the pushback here gets into the nitty-gritty details of the bill text, which I want to unpack, but we'll save that for another episode. For now, I want to keep our focus on this question of insurance rates. Democrats like Senator Elena Parent dispute whether Georgia's legal system is really to blame for steep premiums. Take auto insurance, for example.
There's like 8 factors that cause it to go up,
yes,
including higher accident rates, more drivers on the road, lots of distracted driving, cars that are more expensive to fix.
Senate Democrats called Kemp's plan, quote, nothing more than licking the boots of insurance companies. Basically, they're saying they don't believe that insurers will pass any savings on to consumers. Personal injury attorney Brian Peake spoke to that.
Allstate, Geico, State Farm. Did anybody sit here at this table and say they're going to lower your insurance rates? No.
Now, I want to point you to a key moment where Senator Parent was questioning Georgia's Republican Insurance Commissioner John King. He's a big supporter of this bill, noting his days as an Atlanta police officer when he met, many corner store owners struggling to stay afloat because of high liability insurance. But King also made this acknowledgement.
A lot of people ask me, well, can you guarantee that the rates will drop? I can't guarantee that. I think it would be wrong for me to tell you that the rates, but I can guarantee you that they will go up if we don't do something about it.
Sam, that really stood out to me. And in the hallways of the state capitol, supporters of this effort, they were concerned about those comments being taken out of context or being used down the road. Also, some of the comments from one of the members of the Judiciary Committee, a Republican member who could be seen as possibly undecided, State Senator Bo Hatchett, who's a trial lawyer and specifically a personal injury attorney.
I'm going to vote yes for this, get it out of committee, but I look forward to continuing to work on this so that we can get something really good passed for the people of the state of Georgia.
Yeah, so I think we were all watching 3 Republicans on this committee, all trial lawyers, so Hatchett, but also Brian Strickland, the committee chair, and Blake Tillery, who really grilled the bill sponsor, Senate Pro Tem John Kennedy. But in the end, the main bill cleared the committee along party lines, 8 Republicans to 3 Democrats. And I think this underscores both the peril you'd put yourself in to hold up a top priority of the governor as a member of his party, and also that negotiations will continue on the finer details of this legislation, which still needs to get to the full Senate before heading to the House. So this process is not over yet.
So, Sam, let's shift across the street from the legislative building to the state capitol, where the Georgia Senate took some votes that got a lot of attention. First, let's talk about that proposed sales tax holiday for firearms, ammo, gun safes, and other accessories. So here's what Senate Bill 47 does. It creates an 11-day state and local sales tax holiday. It would be in October. Why? That's around the beginning of deer hunting season. It set off a fiery debate in the Senate. You heard part of it in the show open with Democratic State Senator Nabila Islam Parks of Duluth, and a bit of imagery. She was standing in the well of the Senate holding her infant son while addressing the Senate body. Now, one of the things Democratic opponents brought up was the timing of the legislation in the aftermath of the Appalachia High School shooting. Here's Democratic State Senator Nan Orrock of Atlanta.
Are you all tone deaf? It's like taking a knife and sticking it right into the very heart of a parent who's lost a child, of a family who's lost a teacher, a dad. And this is the message that we think it's appropriate at this time and in this place? You know it's not. You know it's not the message that we should be sending.
Sam, that led to some pointed responses from Republicans, including State Senator Randy Robertson.
But listen, don't go stand on the bodies of children because you don't like the Second Amendment. That's disgusting.
Now, Sam, Republicans also brought up that Senate Bill 47 does not change the laws around guns, along with issues around mental health, policing, gun rights, and more. Democrats also brought up gun access and whether this sales tax holiday was needed, possibly bringing back some of the old sales tax holidays like the one for school supplies. Also brought up how the state spends its money, in this case, the revenue that's being lost for this holiday. Final thought, Sam. Also on the desk of lawmakers and us reporters who are sitting in the back of the Senate chamber is something called a fiscal note, and that's produced by the Georgia State University Fiscal Research Center. The main point of these documents is to show how much revenue is gained or lost from any tax bill, and in this case, state and local governments are expected to lose about $3 to $7 million a year. But the number that was really more notable to me, Sam, because I've never actually seen or heard this number, is that the projection that every year there's about $1.2 billion in sales of firearms, ammo, gun safes, and other accessories. It's just not a number I've ever heard before. I thought I'd share that with you. Senate Bill 47 passed along party lines, now goes to the House, where I should note it did not get a vote last year. So we'll see if it has a different fate when it goes to the House this time.
We'll be right back. This is Plugged In.
Welcome back to Plugged In.
Okay, let's stick with party line Senate votes. This week, that chamber also took up a controversial bill preventing the state health insurance plan, which covers school teachers, state employees, retirees, and others, from covering gender-affirming care.
So, Senate Bill 39, what's notable about it to me is the lead sponsor of this bill, Republican State Senator Blake Tillery, who is also the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee.
We're not outlawing that at all. We're just saying the position that I think is the position of the majority of Georgians, that state taxpayer dollars are not going to be used for transgender surgeries.
Now, one of the Democrats to push back was State Senator Rahul Kemp.
To communities like our trans community that are being told, you don't matter, we don't want you. First, we don't want you playing sports. Now we don't want you on our health benefit plan, even though you or your family members are contributing to our society, contributing to our government. We don't want you.
Sam, all 33 Republicans voted for it, while most Democrats voted against it, with a handful not voting or being excused from the vote. Senate Bill 39 goes to the House. I should note that Republican Speaker John Burns has mostly talked about narrowly focusing on transgender girls in girls' sports, so it's not clear if this is going to be a priority for the House.
Rahul, I've covered a lot of the legislation focused on transgender Georgians over the last couple of sessions. And, after covering a bill moving through the legislature, I usually find myself a few months later in a federal courtroom where it's being challenged. I imagine this bill will also be challenged in the courts if it eventually becomes law.
Sam, that came up in the debate. Here's what Tillery had to say about that.
Equal protection will be violated if we allowed this for one group and not for the other. But we're just categorically saying, hey, we're not going to pay for this care with state taxpayer dollars. I don't see how that violates the Equal Protection Clause.
Opponents of this bill, of course, would disagree with that. Similar policies have already resulted in lawsuits, and so we'd have to see what happens in the courts if this bill does become law.
Sam, President Donald Trump has really been focused on gender identity, and we've been talking on the show about some of the ways Republicans at the Capitol are emulating Trump. And Sam, you've been also watching how Republican members of Georgia's congressional delegation are also moving to mirror Trump's specific priorities.
Let's start with one that really jumped out to me when I first heard about it. You might think this is a joke, but no. Representative Buddy Carter introduced a bill in Congress to rename Greenland Red, White, and Blue Land. That's as Trump tries to strong-arm Denmark into giving up the territory.
Sam, the only thing I can think about is back at home, my wife and I, we have Blue Land blankets that we got when Atlanta used to have a hockey team called the Thrashers, and the fans were called Blue Land. So that's all I could think of when I saw this bill.
Well, you might want to bring those on your next trip to Greenland. Okay, so that seems a little unlikely, but let me turn your attention to something that cuts to the heart of separation of powers, as some experts worry about a brewing constitutional crisis. Representative Andrew Clyde is co-sponsoring legislation to repeal the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. That's a law passed in the Watergate era to rein rein in presidential overreach. As you know, and probably learned in Civics 101, the legislative branch has power of the purse, both in Congress and also here at the state capitol. The Impoundment Control Act ensures the president spends the money Congress appropriates. But Trump, as we've been following in the news lately, wants to freeze or eliminate existing funding for many agencies and programs. This week, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene chaired the first hearing tied to Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, which is looking to slash federal programs and funding.
We will fight the war on waste shoulder to shoulder with President Trump, Elon Musk, and the Doge team.
And on that note, a top target of this effort has been the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which has about 10,000 employees working at its Atlanta headquarters.
That's right. I logged on to a Zoom press conference this week with our colleague, health reporter Jess Mador, who's been really following this stuff. And Senator John Ossoff was joined by former top CDC officials, basically trying to make the case for why the agency is so critical to managing public health at home and abroad, as Trump moves to slash the CDC workforce and cut research-related funding.
And I am sounding the alarm on the dire threat to public health in Georgia, across the country, and around the world that is posed by these unprecedented partisan political attacks on the CDC.
Now, these efforts are being challenged in the courts, including separate cases that have to do with those buyout offers to federal government employees, including at the CDC, and also an effort to slash research funding from the National Institutes of Health. Georgia research universities like Emory received millions in this funding, as does the CDC. Now, this week, some state attorneys general sued. Georgia's Attorney General Chris Carr did not join that suit.
And Sam, I wanted to finish on a heavier note, as there's been some news about two well-known figures in Atlanta and Georgia politics. First, former Republican State Representative Terry England, who's been serving as chief of staff to Speaker John Burns. He was involved in an accident on his farm where he sustained serious spinal injuries. There's still a lot of assessment that has to happen and very likely a long recovery. And we also had some news from across the street at Atlanta City Hall, where City Council President Doug Shipman suddenly announced that he's not running for re-election this year because of a serious medical issue in his family. These are both men I enjoy working with, both men that are getting a lot of prayers, and a lot of people are thinking about both here at the state capitol and across the street at Atlanta City Hall.
That's it for this edition of Plugged In from WABE. If you loved the Gold Dome Scramble podcast, you can find all that rich analysis and context right here.
And if you enjoy our show, do us a favor, head over to the feed dedicated to Plugged In and subscribe. Leave us a rating or a review. It really helps us.
You can also keep tabs on this legislative session at wabe.org/under the gold dome. Plugged In is produced by Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick.
Sam, happy Valentine's Day.
You too, Rahul.